I used to believe that real love was unbreakable, that if you put in the effort, if you fought for it, it would always be enough. But standing here today, I realized how wrong I was. I wasn't supposed to be here today. Not in this courtroom. Not in this situation. Not sitting across from the woman I once called my soulmate. Now sitting beside another man. They whispered to each other, laughed, exchanged smiles like two teenagers passing notes in class. She didn't even seem the slightest bit nervous, and that's what stung the most. Not the betrayal, not the months of lies, but the sheer ease with which she moved on from me. Lenora had always been good at pretending. She could cry on cue, spin a lie so smooth that you believe it even when something in your gut told you otherwise. But today, she wasn't pretending. She was genuinely happy, and that was when I knew, perhaps for the first time, that I never really mattered to her. A part of me had suspected this all along. When I first found out about Emmerich, I told myself she had just made a mistake, that maybe she got caught up in something, that deep down, she still loved me. But now, seeing her here, sitting beside him, comfortable, glowing, so completely at ease, it shattered whatever little hope I had left. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to relax. I almost canceled today, almost let them win, but something inside me refused to give up. I spent the entire night replaying everything, every sign I'd ignored, every time she looked at me, like I was just a background character in her life. And in the end, one realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I had made it too easy for her to betray me. I had trusted blindly. I had believed in things that were never real. And now, I was going to make sure she knew exactly what she had thrown away. Because there was something Lenora didn't know. She thought this was just another simple divorce hearing. She thought she and Emmerich would walk out of here hand in hand, ready to start their new life, while I would fade into the background. She had no idea what I had planned. As I walked into the courtroom, her confident smirk faltered for a brief moment. It wasn't much, just a tiny shift in her expression. But I saw it. She wasn't expecting me to show up. Of course, she'd never admit that. She was too skilled at keeping her mask on, too practiced at playing the game. But I knew her better than she thought, and that small flicker of hesitation told me everything I needed to know. Emmerich, sitting next to her, leaned in and whispered something in her ear, and she laughed. Her laughter was light, effortless, like nothing in the world could touch her, like today was just another box to check before she moved on with her perfect life. But still, she didn't look away from me. I walked toward my seat, not in a rush, not dragging my feet, just moving with purpose, letting each step echo in the cold, sterile silence of the courtroom. It was strange. I had imagined this moment so many times in my head. What I would say, what I would do, would I shout, would I demand answers? Would I let the anger I had kept bottled up for so long finally spill out? But now that I was here, standing just a few feet from the woman who had shattered my life, and the man who had helped her do it, I felt calm. No, not calm. Clear. A clarity that only comes after you've lost everything, and finally understand the real value of what you had. I sat down across from them, and placed my folder on the table with careful precision. I wasn't here to beg. I wasn't here to fight. I was here to end this, the right way. The judge entered a few minutes later. He was an older man, his eyes tired, probably from years of hearing cases like mine. Divorce cases, broken hearts, bitter endings. A formality, really. The divorce was uncontested. Lenora had made sure of that. She wanted a clean break, a quick escape, so she could start fresh with Emmerich without the hassle of a drawn-out court battle. She thought she was leaving me behind. She was wrong. Mr. Holloway, the judge began addressing me. Apologies for the delay. Are we ready to proceed? I nodded. Yes, Your Honor. But before we do, there's something I'd like to present. Lenora frowned, but it was only for a second, before her confident facade returned. What are you doing, Alan? She asked, her voice dripping with that same exasperated amusement, as if I were just causing unnecessary drama. I ignored her. Instead, I opened my folder, pulled out the first document, and handed it to my lawyer, who then passed it to the judge. Silence filled the room. Lenora's foot began tapping against the floor in impatience. Emmerich leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, wearing a lazy grin like none of this really mattered to him. Then the judge's expression shifted. He read the document once, then twice, Then he adjusted his glasses and exhaled slowly, looking over the rim of his spectacles at Lenora. "Mrs. Holloway," he said, voice steady, "were you aware that your soon-to-be ex-husband has submitted a financial discrepancy report regarding your shared assets?" I watched her face change in real time. The smirk disappeared. The confident, calculated mask she had worn so well for so long cracked right in front of my eyes. What financial report?" she asked, forcing a laugh. "That's absurd. We already split everything fairly." I leaned forward, my fingers steepled together, my gaze steady. "Did we?" Her eyes snapped to mine. The first real sign of panic. Because Lenora knew exactly what I was talking about. She had siphoned money from our joint account for months before I found out about the affair. Small amounts at first. Dinners, spa trips, nothing that would raise suspicion. But then, the sums grew larger. A business investment in a non-existent company. A loan to a friend who didn't even exist. And the best part, she thought she had covered her tracks. She thought she had outsmarted me. But I had been watching. I had let her believe she was getting away with it, all while gathering the evidence I needed. Now, as the judge flipped through page after page of the documented transactions, I saw her breath quicken. "Mr. Holloway," the judge continued, turning back to me, "are you requesting a financial audit before the finalization of this divorce?" I smiled. The first genuine smile I had worn in months. "Yes, Your Honor. I believe my wife has been less than honest about our shared assets, and I would like a full, thorough review before we proceed any further." A sharp inhale came from Lenora's direction. I could feel the storm brewing within her. Emmerich, for his part, finally looked less amused. His grin had faded, replaced by a concerned frown, as he whispered something to her under his breath. And in that moment, I knew I had shattered whatever fantasy they had built together. The real fun was just beginning. My pulse steady. "Do we have enough?" I asked, and Howard sighed. "More than enough. The audit is just the beginning. Once we present the evidence of financial misconduct, the judge isn't just going to freeze the assets. He's going to revoke her right to any marital property. Everything. The house, the cars, the savings, the retirement fund, all of it will be off limits to her and Lenora." She had no idea what was coming. Meanwhile, back in the courtroom, Lenora was pacing, her heels clicking rapidly against the tile floor, as she chewed at her perfectly manicured nails, a nervous habit she had when things weren't going her way. "What just happened?" Emmer asked, rubbing his jaw. "You said this was going to be easy." "It was supposed to be," Lenora hissed. "I don't understand. Heek never fought back before. He always just let things happen." Emmer folded his arms, his patience wearing thin. "Well, he's not letting it happen now. What's this about an audit?" Lenora clenched her fists. "It's nothing. Just a delay tactic. He doesn't know anything. He's just trying to get back at me." But even as she said it, she didn't believe it. Deep down, she knew. She knew she'd underestimated me. She just didn't know how badly. I sat in my car outside the courthouse, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The weight of everything that had just happened hadn't fully settled yet, but I could feel it creeping up on me, slow and steady like a tide rising around my ankles. For so long, I had been the man who let things slide, the one who compromised, the one who avoided conflict to keep the peace. And where had that gotten me? Betrayed, used, tossed aside. Not anymore. I took a deep breath and pulled out my phone. There was only one call I needed to make. "Mr. Holloway." The voice on the other end answered after 2 rings. "Are we green?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. "Do it." 1 hour later, Lenora sat stiffly in the back seat of Emmer's car, her phone pressed to her ear, her perfectly curated life crumbling one piece at a time. "What do you mean they froze the account?" she hissed, her voice a barely contained whisper of panic. "I mean exactly what I said," her banker replied. "There's been a legal hold placed on your assets due to an ongoing investigation. We're not authorized to release any funds until the matter is settled." Her stomach twisted. "Investigation? What is he talking about?" Lenora shot a glance at Emmer, but he was too busy scrolling through his phone, oblivious to the storm raging inside her. "Who authorized this?" she demanded. There was a long pause. "Your husband." Lenora felt the breath leave her lungs. "Alan, the man she'd always viewed as predictable, weak, a pushover. He did this." "Listen, there has to be some mistake," she forced out, fighting to keep her voice steady. I want this reversed. Now. I'm afraid that won't be possible, the banker said. Until the audit is complete, your funds are inaccessible. The call ended before she could say another word. Lenora sat frozen, her phone still clutched in her hand. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. Emmer finally looked up. What's wrong? She swallowed hard, debating whether or not to tell him the truth. But then his phone buzzed, and everything got worse. At first Emmer thought it was just another routine email, one of his many side projects, a business deal, maybe even an update on his offshore investments. But as he skimmed the message, his pulse spiked. Lenora was talking, saying something about their money being frozen, but he barely heard her, because his accounts had just been flagged too. He clicked the second message, then the third. His entire operation, the carefully constructed financial web he'd spent years maintaining, was suddenly under scrutiny. The audit wasn't just about her. Alan had gone after him too. Back to my perspective, I leaned against my car, watching the courthouse doors from a distance, waiting. Any second now, it would happen. And then there it was. Lenora burst outside, her eyes wild, scanning the parking lot. She wasn't composed anymore. She was unraveling. For the first time since this all started, she knew what it felt like to lose control. I smiled, not out of spite, not out of cruelty, but because after everything she'd done, after the months of deception, manipulation, and betrayal, I had finally evened the playing field. And we weren't done yet. I watched from a distance, as Lenora stood frozen in the parking lot, her phone gripped so tightly in her hand that I half expected it to shatter. I could almost hear the gears in her head turning, scrambling for an explanation. And out, but there wasn't one. Emmer stormed out behind her, his face flushed red, his usual arrogance replaced by panic. He was waving his phone around like a lunatic, barking into it, as if sheer force would reverse what had just happened. It wouldn't. I'd made sure of that. I took my time walking toward them. No rush, no theatrics, just slow, deliberate steps. I wanted her to feel every second of this. She turned as soon as she saw me, her expression flickering between rage and something much deeper. Fear. You jerk, she hissed. I raised an eyebrow. That's a hell of a greeting, considering you were the one laughing in court an hour ago. Her nostrils flared. You froze my accounts. I tilted my head. Technically the court did. I just pointed them in the right direction. Lenora let out a humorless laugh, shaking her head. So that's what this is. Revenge? You think ruining me is going to make you feel better? I leaned in slightly. You ruined yourself, Lenora. I just stopped cleaning up after you. She opened her mouth, but Emmer cut her off. How did you do this? He demanded, his usual confidence gone, replaced by something that almost resembled disbelief. I looked at him, really looked at him, and I sighed. The realization dawned on him that he had completely underestimated me, that Lenora had, that they had both played a game without understanding the stakes. You thought I wouldn't fight back, I said evenly. You thought I'd just roll over and let you both walk away with everything. That's how little you thought of me. Neither of them said a word, so I kept going. You could have walked away clean. You could have had your fun, built your little fantasy together, but instead you got greedy. You stole from me. You laundered money through our accounts. And you expected me to just disappear. Lenora shook her head. You have no proof. I smirked. Oh, I have proof. That's why the accounts are frozen. That's why your assets are under investigation. And that's why by the end of this, you're going to have nothing. The words landed harder than a slap to the face. Lenora's face turned ghostly pale. Emmer took a step back, muttering something under his breath, his hands balling into fists, not in a way that scared me, but in a way that told me he was already planning his escape. Because now he realized something too. This wasn't just Lenora's problem anymore. He was tied to her, to the mess she'd created, and soon to the fallout, the unraveling. Lenora let out a shaky breath, her confidence cracking piece by piece. You don't want to do this, Alan. You think you're punishing me, but you're just proving that you're just as cruel as you think I am. I laughed a real deep laugh. Cruel? No, Lenora. You were cruel. You cheated. You stole. You lied. I'm just making sure you don't get rewarded for it. Her lip trembled. It was subtle, but I saw it. I saw the exact moment she realized she had lost. Emmer, however, wasn't quite as sentimental. He suddenly straightened, his eyes darting around the parking lot, like a man calculating his next move. "You're on your own," he muttered. Lenora whipped around. "What? You heard me," he said coldly. "This is your mess. I didn't sign up for this level of drama." Lenora's mouth fell open. But Emmer was already walking away, just like that, just like she had walked away from me. I let it sink in for her. Let her stand there watching as the man she had risked everything for left her standing in the wreckage. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel angry. I just felt free. Lenora stood there, completely still, as Emmer walked away without looking back. It was surreal watching her be on the receiving end of abandonment. She had spent months planning to leave me in the dust, carefully crafting her future with him. And now she had nothing. For the first time she wasn't the one in control. I should have felt sorry for her. A part of me expected to. But standing there, seeing the way her hands trembled, the way her carefully curated world crumbled in real time, I felt nothing. No sympathy, no regret, just closure. She turned back to me slowly, as if she were still processing what had just happened. Her eyes searched mine, maybe looking for some kind of weakness, some small crack in my armor that she could exploit. There was none. "You really did it," she whispered. I nodded. "I did." She let out a shaky breath, crossing her arms like she was trying to hold herself together. "So what happens now?" I studied her for a long moment before answering. "Now you deal with the consequences of your choices. The financial audit will go through. The court will see the misconduct for what it is. You'll lose everything you took. And when that happens," I paused, making sure she was really listening, "you'll finally understand what it feels like to be discarded." She flinched. Just a little. Just enough for me to know that, for the first time, she actually felt it. Not just the loss of money. Not just the humiliation of being abandoned. But the weight of all of it. She had spent so long playing games, manipulating people, believing she would always come out on top. Not this time. This time she was alone. The silence stretched between us, and for a moment, I thought she might fight back, that she might try one last desperate attempt to shift the blame, to spin the story in her favor. But she didn't. Instead, her shoulders slumped, and she looked away. I took that as my cue to leave. For so long I had been waiting for this moment. The moment she finally realized that she couldn't hurt me anymore. And now that it was here, I had nothing left to say. So I turned around, walked to my car, and drove away without looking back. Because for the first time in years, I was free.